I think I know everybody in the, but actually a couple I just met today. But for those who don't know me, I'm Betty Schultz. I'm Paul's widow. God, I hate saying that word. But and I'm going to be, since Paul isn't here to MC, you'll have to settle for me. But I just want to thank you all for coming to my at our stars. Is it on now? Yeah, it is. Okay. But don't worry, we've got a couple audio and visual engineers here. While with all's ITVA friends and radio, so we'll get through it, no problem. But thank you all so much for coming to honor the celebrate Paul. I know many of you have come in long distance, and I really appreciate it. And as our friend David Boyman said, Paul's up there looking down on us, smiling. Who is there?
Here, everybody. There's here.
So he is very much here with us today. So I just want to start with a video that Paul's dear friend Dave Sika put together with pictures from Paul's life starting at 2 weeks old. So. I just want to give a big, big thank to Paul's friend Dave Seecup for putting together that movie.
It was an honor. It was an honor.
And for everybody who sent pictures that went in it too. And I know a lot of it went by fast. We'll actually have it running without on a closed loop during lunch, so you can see it again if you want. And also the music that was on the video are 2 songs from the CD you have in the gift bag there. It's one of Paul's regrets that he never got to put out the instrumental album he'd been working on for the last couple of years. So his good friend Roy Yofelson, also known as Uncle Roy, mastered all the songs, put them together in a CD. We got them duplicated. So that's what's in the gift bag. And you might be saying, wait a minute, I don't have a CD player anymore. Just in case, there's also a USB there. Sure. Cordo. Also Uncle Roy's idea. So you can play it in the car, on your computer, whatever. So
if anybody needs an audio cassette or an 8-track, I can make that. Because for a little overly proud, but you can find out. You might even still have a cassette in the car. I don't know. I'll be happy to make one. But Betty, I want to present this to you. Gonna get.
Oh, we mean, thank you.
That's the commemorative. Have the CD.
Pretty hearing and
Rain. I think that it always know how Paul can tell this very forward.
what?
Because it was a late broke love, and we so produced it. So thank you.
And one last thing before we have lunch, and that is Paul's good friend back from the Brown days, David Boymus, is going to come up and share a couple of reminiscences of Paul and say grace for us, and then we'll have lunch.
I want to preface my remarks tonight by asking you each to take a long look around this room and look at the faces. Look at the eyes of all the people here. Do you see? Do you see? In the words of one of Paul's songs, paraphrasing it, thing that we all have in common is Paul. Now, we each carry with us in our hearts and minds a piece of Paul. It's here. He's here. How can we say Paul is gone? He's here. But my special piece is what I want to share with you. And other people I know are going to share their pieces as well later on, but this is mine. And that is that 30 years ago, I had the privilege of being asked by Paul and Betty to help them put together their wedding ceremony and then to be the officiant at that ceremony when they said their vows. Some of you were at that celebration then, and perhaps you can remember I bear some resemblance to the guy who stood up and made that happen. But it was my privilege. And Betty, I want to say something personal to you. We know that you and Paul would have had a different plan for this celebration this weekend. Okay. We all stand with you. We love you. But thanks again for inviting us here because we can celebrate this with you. Love you.
Thank you.
Yeah. In the process of working with Paul and Betty on their wedding ceremony, I learned something about Paul. I saw a side of Paul that I had never seen before. As Betty said, we went back to the Brown days, and Paul and I played some music together, and we shared a lot of laughs, and, what we know since then. But during that process, working together with Betty and Paul, I saw a deep, thoughtful, spiritual side of that man that I hadn't realized was there. And I would like to characterize it as introspective. And I mean that in the best possible sense of that word. The ability to examine himself. Many times in the course of our discussions, Paul would quote the words of that beat philosopher Ram Dass, who said, "Be here now." Be here now. I never forgot that. And even though I have a degree in theology myself, Paul's words took me a step beyond. And even up until the last few times that Paul and I communicated, that same theme was reiterated: be here now. So as I pondered that, I've come to realize that kind of cuts across some of the paradigms in our modern society. We hear such things as references to bucket lists. And the phrase over and again, life's too short to fill in the blank. All right? Life's too short to do this, or life's too short to not do the other thing, or what have you. I'm here to tell you tonight that life is precisely as long as it is. Okay? We don't have the privilege of changing that. We're limited in our ability to control the future and determine where we go and what we do. And we waste an awful lot of time, therefore, wishing that we were somewhere else or somehow else that we are. Paul said, be here now. And I want to thank you, Paul, for teaching me that. The corollary is something that I love from the Tao, and that is the chapter that says, without going out of my door, I can know all things on earth. Without looking out of my window, I can know all things in heaven. Changing gears a little bit, and I'm concluding here, so bear with me. I can know all things in heaven. A couple of weeks ago, we saw a dramatic astronomical event. Many of you saw it, I'm sure. Those of us who live in the North Country, we experienced it in a different way as we were inundated with hundreds of thousands of Australians, spent billions of dollars to prepare for them and billions more to clean up after me. And it was highly touted as the event of a lifetime. And if Paul could loan me his voice for just a minute, I would cue the studio reverb and say, the event of a lifetime. But I say phooey. Every single day is the event of a lifetime. We need to learn to live that way. Every single day. Be here now. So this is the event of a lifetime. It's the event of Paul's lifetime, and the event of our lifetime. So let us celebrate. And to conclude, I'd like to say, Paul would often, talking with me, draw down deeply into his cultural and religious roots and say, l'chaim, to life. So I'd like to ask us all, we're all from many different faiths or no faith in particular, let us offer our thanksgiving for the life of Paul, for the wonderful relationship with Betty and Wendy and all the friends and family and colleagues here, and for the blessings of food and drink and the friendship that we will have tonight in celebration. Amen.
Just a few people from various aspects of Paul's life to share some of their reminiscences of Paul. And first is his, now what did we say this was, Mike? First cousin once removed. And his mother, one of Paul's favorite cousins, the other one is also here, Sam back there, couldn't be here with us, but she did write something that Mike is going to read and then share his own remembrances of Paul. So, Mike?
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you, Betty. This is amazing, and it's also wonderful to meet so many of you today. My name's Mike Jones. Paul's cousin, first cousin once removed. And my mom, Melissa, sadly couldn't be here today, but she did, as Betty said, wrote some childhood memories she has of Paul that she wanted me to read to you all today, and she really wished she could have been here. So here are the notes from my mom. Paul and I were first cousins as our mothers were sisters. Paul lived in New Rochelle, New York, and my mother and I lived in Montreal. Occasionally, Paul and his mom would take the train, one of Paul's favorite things, up to Montreal to visit. This was cause for a real celebration for me because I am an only child, like Paul. Paul was 3 years older than me with an array of new, very fun, and unusual interests. He was very sweet with me, his younger cousin. So one thing we did was stand outside on the sidewalk of our busy street, watching cars whiz by as he identified each and every vehicle. When he wasn't spewing out which car was which, we could count up how many cars there were of a certain color. So cool. In the duplex I lived in, there was a very long hallway which had offshoots to the rooms. Paul saw this hallway as a golden opportunity to set up a traffic control system in his intersection so that he and I could collect enough money to go to the exciting Belmont amusement park. He imposed traffic fines if people didn't stop walking down the hall at the little cardboard red light signals we had made. They would have to pay 5 cents if we caught them, and we'd add the nickels to a jar of money we were saving up so we could go there, which we did. Another thing Paul did with me was get a huge piece of white butcher wrapping paper, and using colored pencils under his tutelage, we drew a made-out village that had roads, buildings, cars, people, trees, and flowers. Once you had Main Street, you could add anything you wanted. I did this for years after he left. Finally, as most of you probably know, Paul was very musical. Thanks to the efforts of his mom, Shermer Music Publishing Company published a couple of his 2-page musical compositions he had written for the piano when he was 8 years old.
It's Mozart.
But plus one, ready? One, called Hymn to God, was played several times during Friday night services at their temple as his mom sang the words. Such wonderful memories. I was so lucky to have Paul for my cousin and will always miss him. All right, so I'm just going to add one more note from me about Paul, who I wish I had more time with. I'm in the Foreign Service. I've been overseas for 14 years, and I wish I was back. I just got back in July. I wish I was back a year earlier, so I would have had more time with them. He was always a wonderful cousin, but we did have one moment I wanted to mention that Betty and I were just talking about, actually. Yeah, Paul and Betty hosted me and actually still my best friend when we were 19 years old and showed us around New York City. For 2 Cleveland kids, it was our first time in the big city. We loved it, and it spurred an interest in travel and exploration, which in part led to my career as a Foreign Service officer and my life living around the world, serving our country. So Paul and Betty have had a really big impact on my life. And I think you knew that. Paul, you were a great cousin and a great person. You're missed. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the Connecticut years. And one of Paul's radio friends, Clem Infante, did I pronounce that right? Is going to share a little of her remembrances about Paul. Clem?
Oh gosh, I'm actually very humbled to be in front of this group of people that a lot of people I didn't know, and I'm so happy to have met you all.
Hold the mic a little closer.
Little closer.
Yeah, there you go.
I worked at WHCN. I was a radio announcer with Paul, and it's hard to talk about just WHCN because all of us here, even WWUH people, we were more of a family than we were anything else. We played together, we did music together, we shared music together, and it wasn't just business, really. Okay, I mean, anybody here from WWUH will know that it was a family, it wasn't business. Anyway, she wanted me to talk about some of the things that happened there. And I have a couple of little stories that I can remember. There are 3 of us, Kathy and Marcia Solomon and I were hired, and Kathy was at WCCC, and Marcia was at WPLR in New Haven, and I was at WHCN. And in those days, women were breaking into radio. You know, George Chandler Morris hired me, and I'm not sure about the rest, but we were on the air about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we were getting tired, because they put us in the graveyard. I mean, women really were breaking into radio. And I don't know, Kathy says it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we just decided we had to do something fun. So we all decided to play the exact same piece of music. And it was Inagata Davida. Something matter where you were in Connecticut, that watching just anything. Well, we thought it was hysterical. We were just laughing our heads off. And the next morning, this was a Saturday morning, Paul came up to the station, like he does, and he just work. And he said, "That was very clever." Now, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember. But he was paraphrasing. He said, "That was a very clever thing you did last night." And I said, "What, Paul?" And he said, "I heard it. I was listening to you all, and there wasn't any place I go where I get, it must have been about a DeVita. What the hell are you guys doing? I said we were doing it, but I didn't know I was going to get caught. And that was one of the big things. And he said, it's cool, I understand. And one of the other things was that we talk a lot about albums here. He had a lot of albums. So we all had, right? We had a lot of albums. But he came into me one morning and he said, how come you're not playing these albums that I have? And I said, well, I'm a part-timer here and I work on the weekends and whenever somebody's needed. But, I don't get all the albums. You don't distribute them to me. And then you get 6 of them or so and they go to the full-timers first. And that's all I got, so I like to listen to this music before I do it. And he said, okay, from now on, you will have an hour's first. And I did. And when I moved out to Little Rock, I had so many boxes of albums. It was quite amazing. But as a family, we liked each other. We took care of each other. We hung out together. A lot of the people from WWUH too, we all hung out together and spent a lot of time going to places like Park Hampstead and swimming in the water. I should say that was their reservoir. And just having a great time being together whenever we could be. And I miss him. We tried to work out reunions, and we did. We worked out reunions. I don't know how many we went to, but every time we did, we'd see each other, and we'd remember. And Paul taught me everything that I know about music, or just about everything I knew about music. And I loved him, and I loved all of the people I worked with. And I'm sorry, non-putable. He was an amazing man. He knew music more than anybody I know. Maybe Jim Shanahan, who also knew music. And they were like my brothers. They were my brothers. Paul is my brother. We talked all the time. Kathy set up a web page for us called These Days instead of Those Days. And we all got on it, and we kept in touch. And we never, backed off from each other. And I guess as a result of that, we have, so many reunions. And, knew what everybody was doing, how their families were coming along. And we would discuss politics and everything, just everything. And the last time I saw Paul, we came up in September 2021, and we went to a reunion, and we went to Park Hampstead. We took a lot of nice pictures, and there was just something about Paul that led me to think that things weren't going too well. And I kind of felt like that was the last time I was going to see him. He took us to a train museum. We something else. Word. And of course we were good. This was one of the most fun rides I'd ever been on. Well, when Paul died, I was in York, England, and I was telling my friend about how much Paul loved trains. And she said, well, you have to go to the British Museum of Trains. And I thought, oh, wow, this would be really cool. So we did. We went to the British Museum in York, England, and I swear he was there. Okay, I have children. But he was there, and I looked at all kinds of trains, got on these trains, and just felt him. And took a lot of pictures and sent them to you. I sent pictures to you. So I don't know what else to say except for that I am truly going to miss him, and I loved him very much. And glad to forget him. I'll never forget him. And I thank God that he was at WHCN. He was one of the best radio announcers out there really did their work. They worked hard to know what music to play and knew what they were going to play before they did it. And just taught me to be more accurate in what I do. And thank you. Please remember him.
Thank you, Clem. And another person from the Connecticut radio days who couldn't be here today is Jim Shannon, and Steve Berrien is going to read something that Jim wrote for the occasion.
Jim Shanahan and myself and Paul, we were all active at WHCN in the early 70s, 72 through 75 for myself. Jim was there a little longer. And after Paul's HCN period, I think he went to CCC and then WDRC. But in any case, Jim has a birthday today, and since his wife is throwing him a party, can't be at two places at once. Who's asked me to read this letter? So, my name is Jim Shanahan, also known as Jim Shannon or Rex. Rex was his air name. And I'll begin by saying, due to my birthday this weekend and my Sunday morning radio show, which he did this morning on WWH and University of Hartford, it's impossible for me to be here today. But I asked Steve to give you this message. Friends, my heart is here, and an enduring friendship with Paul is something to cherish. I think of him almost every day. I first met Paul some 52 years ago at WHCN in Connecticut, where he was hosting the key 3 to 7 afternoon drive. At that time, Jim was just a college kid working the weekends and fill-ins on HCN. Paul had a unique multi-tool radio skill set. He had an unbelievable great voice. He was a master of the segue, and he had an encyclopedia mind of music genres and a quick intellect. And who could forget the vintage 1949 Packard convertible that he was driving around Hartford when he was at HCN. As music director, Paul was very valued and respected by the major record companies at the time. He had the leverage to break new album tracks from the latest releases and subsequently influence sales and the latest musical trends in the industry. We both shared a great love for the Rhode Island beaches, Moonstone, Watch Hill, Matunic. They had a beauty and intrinsic value that meant so much to both of us. Speaking of Rhode Island, who could forget the 2001 radio reunion at Block Island? A small but tight-knit group of radio pros got together, caught up on our lives with a beautiful backdrop, pristine beaches, excellent bistros, and the salt air all around us. And then fast forward to near present day, a couple of years ago, shortly after COVID, we had a mini radio reunion in West Hartford, Connecticut, after a series of pandemic reschedulings. We stayed close, and it was well worth it. It was nice to see Paul and Betty with a tight-knit group of radio friends, and it meant so much to me just to be there. Jim had several years of declining health within the last 10 or 12 years, but he recovered, and he's doing well. I just had lunch with him a few weeks ago. Jim goes on to say, I miss him with our radio music discussion group, which was these days that Kathy put together. And that's been going for about 20 years. And we have over 50,000 entries on that, which is, when Paul was alive, all of us, myself included, we tried to get on every day to talk with our friends. You're right. He was our sounding board, resident musicologist extraordinaire, and it just hasn't been the same since. Betty, I'm so sorry for your loss, as you were the love of his life, having met by chance at Brown. It was something meant to be, and I know this to be true. Some final thoughts. I can tell you that Paul was one of very few North Stars for me in both my professional and personal lives. He is and always will be a New England progressive radio legend and trailblazer. Although he grew up in New York, New England.
Sorry, good part.
It happens, New England always had a special place in his heart. May God bless him. Thank you, Betty, for letting me share these words with all his friends that are here today. So, those words are from Jim. Myself, I like I said earlier, I knew Paul from 72 on, and my wife Valerie, who grew up in New Jersey, when we would come to New Jersey to see the family, I always tried to make a side trip to see Paul. And we would frequently meet at a coffee shop and just have coffee and shoot the breeze for an hour. And in later years, we had several political discussions, and he was a great influence on me and my thought patterns, and I came to regard him as my older brother. And I miss him terribly. But that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, now we're actually moving backwards, I realize, to the Brown days. Is Rob over there? Rob, would you like to come up and speak? Rob Sloan? Paul used to call all these guys he formed a great friendship with at Brown, the Brown Gang. So this is one of the Brown Gang.
Let's take a player who was interesting. She came up here. She didn't have a single thing written down. Radio, those things for you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Paul and how we met, and here it goes. I have an abiding memory. Paul sitting at a keyboard, totally rocking and looking up with this amazing, wonderful smile. You all saw that picture. It was typical. What he could do at keyboard was prodigious. What he could hear in his mind was so amazingly good. And as for the song lyric we saw for Rob Carlson and Benefit Street, the one called Shenandoah, he was taken by the dream. With regrets, I can look back at all the years where there were stops, long lapses of communication. With gratitude, I was fortunate to enjoy various connections over the year, particularly recently. Weddings, birthdays, and visits, including being to share some time with Paul and Betty at their beloved home away from home in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Events of so many years past are embedded in our key of who we were, became, and all. In the fall of 1965, I began my college education at Brown University. I initially resided in Archibald House. My roommate was Mike Mallory from Nashville, Tennessee. I played cornet and trumpet for many years, and I still noodled a bit. Early on in that first semester, someone passing by the dorm heard me and found his way up to my room. He asked if I was interested in jazz, and if so, there was a campus radio station that included a jazz show, WBRU, Watts House. I found my way there and thus began a 4-year adventure at WBRU. At that time, Paul was a fixture of major player group who struck up a friendship and began a lifelong journey of shared experience. At that point, in his time at Brown, he had been there for several years. And he graduated in 4 years with a group of us, and a member of the class of 69, or class of 1969. One particularly noteworthy event happened in the spring semester of our sophomore year. Mike's brother Ricky and a friend drove up from Nashville, and a group of us did an all-nighter drive and shifts to Nashville for spring break. Paul, Don Fletcher, Mike, and me. Paul was in heaven. Randall Lockery, the original, musicians, recording studios, the whole music scene. Some of that showed up back in doing later with Paul promoting Country Politan Radio, also known as Country Fall. You know that.
Yeah.
Us. It was legit. When I first became involved with WBRU, the station had been initially at on-campus wired broadcasting as closed circuit. It was subsequently obtained license to become a real broadcast station with a 20,000 watt signal. The migration wasn't easy as there were competing opinions of what direction the station should take. Over time, the programming evolved to include rock, funk, and other progressive music that was taking the country by storm. Grew into a significant player in Rhode Island radio. At some point, someone named Betty Schultz worked for the station. That's in the business department. Do you all know how that finally came out? After graduation, we all headed out on our different journeys. Paul stayed true to his talents, playing with Rob Carlson and Benefit Street, writing and recording music, working at various radio stations, parenthesis, with particular fondness for his time in Hartford, and using his magical voice in various advertising and voiceover venues. He had a incredible voice. And this is a slide, it's not included here, but if you ever heard him do a fine print thing, you know when you get fine print at the bottom? He would do the audio version. He would do the audio version, and just, it was all clear, totally incomprehensible, which is what that noise is supposed to be. On May 7, 2022, he sent out an email to friends and family. Quote, "I'm on the radio again on WOVD 90.1 Upper North Carolina, Monday afternoons at 4 o'clock Eastern Time with the new hour-long show, The Record Room." I was really happy I've been able to see The Record Room. I don't know how many of you saw it, but talk about numbers of albums.
20,000.
20,000. Okay, there it is.
Albums in 45.
40 and they're all now in key.
Yes.
And they were, he found him home this week. Okay. He commented in the email, shows weren't archived yet. For those of us who took him up on the invitation to listen to his pre-recorded broadcast, we got to share time with Paul. It was a wonderful opportunity to reconnect with him and fun to interact via email regarding his eclectic tastes and my knowledge of music. HCGood uploaded Record Room programs to the Internet Archive. Okay, thank you, Diddy. And I don't know if you've listened to them yet, but they're out there and they're available. I think it's incredible legacy. Okay, and with that, the shows are now part of a wonderful legacy Paul left for us. We have much to celebrate. Thank you.
Okay, next we have another member of the Brown Gang, Don Fletcher.
Thank you, Betty.
Yes, kiss it.
It's all these radio people that have wonderful voices that are able to speak extemporaneously. I'm not one of those people. So I wrote it down. I get my glasses and I'll read it to you. I met Paul when I was 17 years old and a freshman at Brown University. Paul was a junior, but he had befriended Rob Sloan, who just met, who happened to be the assigned roommate of Mike Mallory, someone I had roomed with before in a Brown summer program. Rob, Mike, and I became good friends that first semester in 1965, and after a bit, we were hanging out with each other's friends. We were all interested in music, and the middle 60s was a great time to be tuned into the explosion of musical trends. Paul was active at the campus radio station, WBRU, and Rob was interested in joy. Before long, we discovered the facts of Paul's life that were so attractive to freshmen. He lived in an off-campus apartment. He had a car. He didn't drink, but he didn't light his unit. He had about 1 million LPs in his apartment, and he would play them all night long and could intelligently discuss the personnel and the arrangements. He knew everything about music. In addition to these attributes, Paul was a great guy to know. He was generous to a fault, routinely pleasant to be around, and had a great sense of adventure. It didn't matter how late he was always up for a quick trip somewhere. Trips up to Boston were memorable, and it was always a quick trip because Paul drove fast and with utter confidence after. But he was sure that nothing bad could ever happen to him while he was in the car. I lacked that confidence. Look, hey, if you want to get somewhere, there are always going to be some risks. His cars in those days were something else, and he gave them all names. The most beloved was the White Phantom, which was a giant Buick from the early 60s. It was larger than almost any car on the road, and it gave him a feeling that even if there were to be a collision with another car, that the White Phantom was going to prevail. In November of my freshman year, I went to Paul's 21st birthday party in his apartment. Paul was very reflective that night. I remember they mentioned that his father had told him that when he was 21, he'd be a man, and he should be ready to do important manly things. Paul felt that maybe he wasn't quite ready to grow up, and he was still enjoying the life that he had. Most of it at the party were 17 or 18. I think Paul would have been happy to be our age. Well, normally in college, if you have a friend who is 3 years older than you are, it is hard to keep a friendship going for long because of pressures of career and girlfriends, all the stuff that happens to you when you grow up. In Paul's case, he went on a hiatus from Brown after that year. His apartment and a lot of his LPs caught fire. That he had a beautiful, larger, nicer apartment down the street. He took a job at WHIN, the local country music station. A bit before country had a big following in the Providence area. He worked a lot of nights, and he and I would get together at a local diner and have breakfast with the truckers fairly often. Daisy mates. We shared many strange conversations over lousy coffee and heavy China mugs at 2 a.m. While he worked at WEM, we took a road trip to Nashville, Tennessee. This was different than the road trip that Rob talked about. It was just Paul and myself. Paul drove most of the way. I remember vividly his driving down Route 22 in New Jersey. Some of you may know that, in a blinding rainstorm at 80 miles an hour. Visibility was very limited, and the traffic was ugly. Complete confidence. In Nashville, we visited every music publishing house on Record Row as representatives of WEM. In those days, most of the companies were in tiny old single-family homes, which had been turned into offices. Paul talked us into all of these places, and we were showered with free records. We even went out to a recording session where they were recording Christmas music in March. Paul had a great radio voice, and although country music was not really his favorite genre, he used his knowledge of music and the intelligence to learn it very well. In addition to being a DJ, he emceed events. His Brown friends often got invited to improve the turnout. I remember seeing Hank Snow with Rainbow Range Boys at Veterans Memorial Auditorium. Yeah. Look it up. I wanted to get a convertible in some parade through one wound socket. Eventually, however, Paul and Brown came to an understanding, and he was back to being a student. But now he was in my class, It seemed that the idea of extending his youth a few more years had been realized. At this point, the arc of our lives started to head off in different directions. Paul spent a few years as a keyboard musician at Bassett Street. I spent a whole lot of years going to medical school and getting trained as a radiologist. We stayed in touch now and again and would visit if we were in the same area. I was mostly in Rhode Island and watched Paul move from Hartford to New Jersey and marry Betty. Most often, we would all get together for proud reunions. The last one in May of 2023 was special, as Paul and I walked or maybe danced down College Hill, so that we never got to do at our own graduation in 1969 because of the weather. We were the only representatives of our class. The assembled crowd cheered us on, and that felt great. Paul was ever true to Brown, as the song goes, and I think he was very happy to have Brown give him some love. It's good to be with you all, and I know it's a sort of a sad occasion, but it's fun. We're going to want to be like.
Okay, now we're going to move to our New Jersey years, and Paul's good friend and wonderful video producer, Dave Sika, is going to say a couple words.
Wasn't Paul an easy guy to be friends with?
Yes.
I mean, wow. Unlike many of you, unlike some of you, I didn't know Paul back in the Brown days, back in the radio station days. I knew him for much of the second half of his life, and boy, did we have a good time. I met him through work. I met a lot of good people through work. Paul met and made friends with a lot of good people through work too. Many of whom are here with us today. Again, he was just an easy guy to be friends with. I wrote a list here of stuff in no particular order, but we did concerts. We went to professional meetings. We went on train rides. I'm not much of a train guy, but when you know Paul, you go with you learn to like it. And I learned. And we spent a lot of time in diners. The diners were a thing. I mean, some people I go here with, some people here. Paul was always, let's meet at the diner. We had a kind of an interesting friendship in that we were both quite happy and comfortable with kind of lax scheduling. He'd call me up and say, hey, you want to get together today? And I go, I can't get together. All right, well, some other time. I'd call him up sometime and he'd say, hey, I'm going to be in your neighborhood in 10 minutes or whatever. He'd say, come on over. So we just decided that short notice worked for both of us. And we had a lot of nice short notice get-togethers. Paul was, people mentioned his outlook on life. Paul was a non-practicing Jew, I guess, but he was pretty profoundly religious or spiritual. One of the things that I heard him say more than almost anything else is God permits U-turns. That was his mantra. And that was pretty profound and an interesting way to look at life. He spoke from personal experience, and I think everybody who heard him say that could relate to it too. What he probably said more often than that was how lucky he was and how much he loved his wife. Every time I talked to him, he said, I don't know how I ever got so lucky to end up with Betty. And he said it without any self-consciousness or anything. I mean, it was just heart on sleeve. I don't know how life ended up like this, but damn, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. It's kind of like that about him. He was interesting to talk to, but he knew so many things. He was interested in everything. If I was interested in something, he wanted to know more about it. How can you not like somebody like that? He would show up at places. There was the Spectropop online discussion group or the ITVA professional development group. He would show up, and he was one of those rare people who would come in and not sit down and say, okay, show me what you got or entertain me. He'd walk in the door and say, hey, how can I help? And again, how do you not love a person like that? So couple of funny stories. I remember one time, one of the many concerts we went to, we'd see a lot of these, I used to call them the singing, dancing grandpas. All these old doo-wop guys that would be up on, and now, I guess I shouldn't have said that. But these were all, relatively famous guys, all the songs that you know, all the songs that you grew up with. And one of the fellows was up here singing his hit song, and he couldn't remember the lyrics. So Paul walked across the room, got up on the stage with him, and sang the lyrics. And then again, how do you not love a guy? We went to another show, and this is somebody just talked about the Paul's driving. Yeah, I don't have to go there. Everybody knows what his driving is. Very confident. Yeah, but we went to it was the girl groups concert. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I left early, so I got there. I drove in. We're in Manhattan. It was a 42nd Street and 8th Avenue or something. It's right in the heart of the world. And I drove in, and I planned ahead to find a parking lot that I could park my car in. And then I walked down the street to get to the show. Paul toodles in his car, and he drives around the block and finds a parking spot on the street on 43rd Street. Always, every. Utterly confident. Now, they tell you don't talk about politics because somebody else already mentioned politics. So I wasn't sure I was going to mention this, but everybody knows Paul's politics, so there's no secrets here. But I remember we were at the first night in Morristown one year, and we're walking down the street from one event to the other, and we look over to the right, and we see there's a bus parked over there, and the bus has a big sign on it, plastered on the side of it, and it says, "Women for Trump." And Susan and Betty and I kept walking to the next venue, and Paul says, "Hang on, I got to go check some more." And if I remember correctly, Betty said to him, "I'm not bailing you out." Things I never knew about Paul. It was interesting. Go through the photos with Betty. I never knew that he was raised to be a child piano prodigy. He never said. If I was raised to be a child piano prodigy, everybody would accidentally know that. Everybody says that. I never knew how many songs he recorded. I have a couple of his 45s. I've heard this. I've heard him play to the band. But he recorded hundreds. He wrote and played and sang and recorded hundreds of songs. Just absolutely blew my mind when I found that out. He was my go-to guy for all things music. Anytime something came up that I thought was interesting or I wanted to know, I would go pick up the phone and I would call him and I'd say, "Hey, what?" And then we get into the weeds. We get into an hour-long session on some minutia that he all had memorized. And anytime something interesting politically came up, I would go and pick up the phone and I would call him and we'd talk about it and we'd grouse and our blood pressure would go up together. And the weirdest thing is that these days something interesting will come up with some music information at the news or something will come up politically, and I still find myself reaching for the phone, and then I got to stop and say, well, I was very fortunate, very, very fortunate to know him, and I will always treasure that.
Thank you, Ben. I'm not going to say too much because I know I couldn't get through it without crying through it. But as most of you know, Paul was the love of my life. He was my best friend. He was my partner. And I miss him terribly. But I would like to, but I'm trying to appreciate the wonderful lives we had together. And I'd like to read you the poem, which is actually on the back of the memorial card. I can't read through the tears. You can shed tears that he is gone, or smile because he has lived. You close your eyes and pray that he'll come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that he has left. Your heart can be empty because you can't see him, or you can be full of the love you shared. But this has been so helpful for me to focus on all the love we all share with Paul. So, and I think we have a little bit of time. If anyone else wanted to come up and say anything, Liz, yes.
This is an amazing thing to see all the people that you follow. Paul and I were in the same business. Okay, you also have to understand, in our business as voiceover talent, you're not allowed to touch the mic. So I'm not used to holding the microphone. It's supposed to be out here. I met Paul 30 years ago, and when he and I would look, how did that happen? It's like, that doesn't compute. I directed Paul for 10 years when I worked at a recording studio. I was behind the glass, he was behind the mic. When I got fired from that job, because just like in radio, if you don't get fired, you weren't really in radio. When I got fired from that job, the first person I called was Paul. And I realized voice talent were having a heck of a lot more fun than I was behind the glass. And I asked him, I said, do you think I can do that? And he goes, absolutely. And he took me under his wing. I can guarantee you I would not have a career were it not for Paul. He told me about one of the things I learned from him when I was directing him at the recording studio. He would come in, I'd hand him the script, because in those days, this was before internet, okay? This was fax machines and DAP machines and FedExing cassette tapes to people. I would hand him the script, he'd walk in, he'd be in there for about 30 seconds, get the script done, and then what he would do, he would sit down in the corner of the studio, get out a piece of paper, a carbon copy, and another piece of paper, and write out the invoice. How much are we charging? How much am I charging you for this? And he'd hand me the invoice, and he'd walk out and go to the next studio, because it was Paul how voice would travel. In those days, he had a studio to studio to studio. To this day, in my business, a job is not done until I send the invoice out as soon as I send the audio. And I know that for Paul. And Paul was my biggest cheerleader. The other thing he was so happy about when I found the love of my life, the love of my life was a keyboard player. He was very happy about that. He was from Los Angeles. When he decided to move here, the love of my life sold his 1965 Ford Ranchero. Paul looked at me and said, oh, he really does love you. And when I found the love of my life, and I told him that I found the love of my life, he looked at me and he said, now you get it. My love died a week before Steve. My Steve died a week before Paul did. He died on October 17th, and Paul died October 23rd. God needed a couple of keyboard players. And I will be forever grateful for his friendship, for his knowledge, because the last 10 years, whenever he would introduce somebody to me, he'd say, Liz does what I do, but in a different octave. And he always said, you have surpassed me. He goes, you know people and you greet people. And I said, you taught me how to do that. And he taught me how to be a better person. Because when Sika said, God allows U-turns, absolutely. And I'm just forever grateful to have gotten to know him and to have happened in my life. As a Liz.
When we would go to the MCAI and Cinetech meetings, first person you saw was Paul. He wanted your money. No, he would take the money or take attendance and have you sign in. Always a smile, always the same personality. Those meetings started with Paul, and then, yes, we would all go to the diner and sit next to Paul. What did he always order? That soup or, whatever?
Matzo ball.
Matzo ball soup. It was always the same. And what I'll miss about him is, if I can get through it, he would end the conversation with, listen, more later.
Yeah.
Okay.
My name's Adam Listein. I'm one of the Brown guys, although in a different way. I didn't go to Brown. I grew up there because my dad taught there. And I started hanging around the radio station when I was still in high school in 1964, and that's probably when I met Paul. But I didn't really get to know him until I had gone off to college in Pennsylvania myself, would come home summers and would work at BRU. Jim Shanahan, via Steve, referred to Paul as the master of the Segway. I was lucky enough to watch him become the master of the Segway, as we did some progressive rock shows in summers of 68, 69, 70. And I like to think I learned to be good at Segways. I will call myself a master. But partly by studying Paul and partly by doing it alongside of him. Quick trip to Boston. BRU was important in progressive rock radio, but we weren't KSAN in San Francisco or WNEW in New York or even WBCN. But Paul got it into his head one summer, I think the summer of 69, that we want to go up to BCN and just schmooze. And he and I went up there one night, and of all people, the DJ then was Peter Wolf, later vocalist of Jay Giles' band. And it was remarkable to be in that studio, and part of Wolf's shtick was to imitate Wolfman Jack in between. Not in between songs, because we didn't do that in progressive rock radio. But every 4 or 5 songs when he came back on to announce what you had heard, he was Wolfman Jack, not just Peter Wolf. When jumping ahead 55 years, when I retired, I got to connect with a community radio station in Hatboro, Pennsylvania, where I was the permanent substitute for a while, and it really made me happy when Paul connected with WOVB, because we were doing the same thing again, albeit 1,000 miles away. He was the master of the Segway. I'll really miss him. Thank you.
I just want to thank everybody so much for coming. It's just warms my heart to see you all here, and just thank you.